John chapter 13. I figured out what was going on with the mic from this morning. I figured out how to tighten this side piece, so hopefully it won't move on me. But I just told Johnny I couldn't do that. Picking it back up, that was just going to irritate me. But it's great to see everyone tonight. I'm excited that you're here with us to study John chapter 13. We're going to be in verses 34 and 35 tonight. Thank you for watching on YouTube. I'm so thankful that we have the guys upstairs that run that and put that together and have the ability to live stream so people can watch it at home. Let's notice our verse tonight, John chapter 13, verses 34 through 35. Probably a verse that you've heard many times, but I want us to kind of dig in, look at it, and kind of talk a little bit about tonight, have a little bit of discussion about brotherly love. And I think brotherly love is what I call the badge of discipleship. Now, this is kind of the way I want to think about it. I'm going to pick on him because I know he does Boy Scouts. Lofton, how many badges do you have right now with Boy Scouts? Give me a ballpark number. All right, I got to remember to stand right here. They won't be able to see. All right, so you got about 20-something badges. So whenever you receive a badge, let's say you receive a badge in knitting, what does that mean? Well, what's the badge that you're proud of? All right, so we got a first aid badge. Now, what does that badge represent on your side? If somebody sees you and you have a first aid badge, what does that let them know? All right, you took the class, you fulfilled the requirements, so they can look at you and know that's part of who you are as a Boy Scout. You're able to do first aid, administer first aid if the situation allows it. All right, let's hope that there's a situation where Lawson has to do first aid. There's other people there to help him, right? I know you do. I know you do good. You can mend me up, but don't do mouth to mouth on me. Okay. All right. But those badges that Lofton gets doing Boy Scouts, they represent things that he's accomplished. So when you look at those badges, you know that he's met the requirements, and that's what makes his accomplishments up. And so I think brotherly love can be a badge of discipleship. When people look at us, that's something that they should see us representing. Okay, brotherly love. And so I want us to look at this passage here in John chapter 13, verses 34 through 35. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for another. Let's start breaking this passage down. He gives them a commandment to love one another. All right. Now, what is this called? A new commandment. So I want to ask you, the commandment to love, this commandment was given at the Last Supper just right before Jesus' crucifixion. But why is this a new commandment? Why is it called a new commandment here? Let's get your ideas. I did not hear that at all. Okay, they already had the 10 commandments. Anybody else got any suggestions? We could say it's a higher standard. It's a deeper love, and we'll get to that. Any other suggestions? What do y'all think? Okay, be qualified by what Jesus actually did, and we're going to get into that as well. Okay, let's stop and think about it. What has been taught about love? What has God instructed men to do? Okay, had God not already instructed man to love one another? Well, look at Leviticus 19, verse 18. Leviticus 19, verse 18, it says to love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, let's turn over there. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. Yes. Uh-huh. Yep. Right. Absolutely. They've been given a lot of thou shalt nots, but this is more, hey, do this, be positive with this. So we look here, and that was a great comment. We look here in Leviticus chapter 19, and we're starting to see what God has instructed about loving your neighbor and loving other people. Here in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, we read, "You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." One of y'all mentioned, we can go ahead and talk about the 10 Commandments. The whole 10 Commandments can be summed up with love God with everything. And then the last part of it is love your neighbor. And so if you stop and look at the 10 Commandments, the last 6 were given to instruct the Jews in their dealing with one another, how they are to deal with one another. So if you can look at Exodus chapter 20, verses 12 through 17, and you're going to find those 6 commandments. Honor your father and mother, not to murder, thou shalt not murder. Kind of going back to what Chrissy said, you're getting a lot of thou shalt not do this. Thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, and thou shalt not covet. All right, so in the Old Testament, you see this idea of not taking vengeance. You see this idea of loving your neighbor as yourself, like we read in Leviticus. In the last 6 commandments, you see that the way we're supposed to treat people is important. Okay, we're not supposed to harm people, murder them. We're not supposed to take from people. We're not supposed to steal, bear false witness. We're not supposed to covet what our neighbor has. And so back in the beginning, there was instruction on how to treat people. Then let's go to the New Testament, and we can start with Jesus. I mean, Jesus, even before this statement here in John, taught that we are to love other people. Okay, so even before this statement, if you remember in Matthew chapter 22, verses 34 through 40, Jesus taught that man's love for God, okay, and man's love for his neighbor as himself were the 2 greatest. And all of this kind of fulfilled the law of the prophets, okay? And so you can see that even before this statement here in John, and this is what intrigued me here. Jesus has talked about this subject before, about loving others. And so here in Matthew, it's, hey, you need to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So love God with everything you have. We have that recorded in Matthew. And then we have, love your neighbor as yourself. But also, it doesn't stop there. Jesus even teaches about how we are to treat those who are our enemies. Okay, let's look at that. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 through 44. You have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray to those who persecute you. So Jesus even took it a step further. Not only shall you love your neighbor, but even the people that are difficult, even the people that you may struggle to get along with, pray for those people, love those people, okay? And so even Jesus taught that they are to love their enemies. And so it just intrigued me when I was studying about this passage that this was a new commandment. And so I began to ask myself, why is this commandment new? Why does he call it new? What makes this something that's new to them? And I think you guys have hit on it already, and you guys have done a great job answering that question. First of all, this came directly from Jesus, kind of hitting back to what you said. This isn't what other people said, and he isn't expounding on what other people are saying. This comes directly from Jesus to his followers, that they are to love other people. I think the second reason we can call this a new commandment is because it involved, and kind of goes back to what Ms. Jennifer said, it involves a deeper degree of love than any previous teaching about love. Okay, so this is a higher standard, a deeper deeper love than we've ever seen before. Now, why is that? Why do we say that this commandment is deeper? Why are we saying that this is a higher standard? Go back and look at the text and tell me why it's a higher standard. Because we're supposed to love like who? All right. Go back and look at what he said. Back in 13:34 through 35. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Notice what follows. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, people will know that you are my disciples if you have loved one another. So not only is he saying you need to love other people, but what is he adding to it? Love people the way that I love. All right, so let's ask, and we're going to dig a little bit deeper into this as we move forward in our lesson tonight, but just real quickly, how does Jesus love us? Okay, unconditionally. Very good answer. What else? What do we call that type of love? You got it. Sacrificial. Did I hear somebody over here? Agape love. Okay. And so it's a sacrificial love that Christ had for us, a love that he lived out in his own life. And that's why I think we can say that this is the new commandment, because it takes to a higher standard. It takes it to a deeper meaning than everything that we have read and looked at before in the scriptures. But not only that, okay, let's go back to Lawson. I used Lawson at the beginning, and I want to go back to him. Remember the whole analogy with the badges. If somebody sees a badge, they can identify that person has completed this. Lawson has completed CPR. Lawson has completed fire starting. Lawson has completed, what else? What other badges you got? Hiking, navigation, map navigation, whatever it is, ice sculpting, okay? But whatever those badges are, they tell what Lawson has accomplished, all right? So I think another reason that this is a new commandment is because there had never been a group of people who could be identified by their love for one another. Everybody get what I'm saying? There's never been a group of people that could be identified by their love for one another. But that's exactly what he says here at the end of our passage in verse 35. To love, verse 34, to love one another the way that I have loved you, love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples. And so that's why I think that this is a deeper love, and why I think that we can say this is a new commandment, because God's people can be identified by loving others. Now, look, I know that we should be identified by a lot of things. We should be identified. I've heard people say, that person is a rootin' tootin' Bible carrying Christian. Okay, and we should be identified for standing for truth. We should be identified for following the Bible. We should be identified for being servants. But if we do all those things and we're identified by truth and service and doctrine, have we missed something? And I think we have. Because I think the thing that we should be identified with too, besides those things, is brotherly love. And so when people look at our congregation, when people look at Christ's people here at the Batesville Church of Christ, do they see a loving congregation, a congregation filled with brotherly love that goes out and helps people? Okay? And so I think that's why this is a new commandment, because it came directly from Christ. He's not speaking from things before, because it involved a deeper degree of love than any previous teaching taught, to love like he loves. So he's holding us to a higher standard of love. And then this is the first time that a group of people could ever be identified by love. They look at people, they say, oh, those people love each other. They're sacrificial. They have a sacrificial love. They have to be Christians. They have to be followers of Christ. And so I ask you now, what should this brotherly love look like? If we are to love one another, if we are to wear this badge that identifies us as followers of Christ, what should it look like? What you think? And I think Scripture says a lot about this brotherly love and what it should look like. But I want to hear what you guys have to say first. What do you think? What does this brotherly love look like? Okay, again, going back to what Ms. Nancy said, it's a sacrificial love. So Christ was, obviously the best example of this, putting our needs before his, leaving heaven, Philippians chapter 2, coming down and giving his life for us. But it's a sacrificial love, and that means we're willing to put the needs of others before our own. Okay, let's talk a little about this. What are some Bible verses that kind of go along with this? Okay, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. But let's take a look at John. We're in John. Let's flip over a couple of chapters. Look at chapter 15, verse 13. Again, what does this brotherly love look like? Well, it's a sacrificial love, willing to put others' needs first, willing to sacrifice to help others. Well, here in 1 John chapter 15, verse 13, I like this. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than someone to lay down his life for his friends. Verse I read this morning, right? You look at Jesus, this is proof of what love is about. And so this brotherly love is being willing to lay your life down for somebody else. All right, let's not stop there. Let's keep looking. Look at 1 John. So we're going to 1 John, and we're going to look at chapter 3, verse 16. First John chapter 3 in verse 16. By this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. But if anyone has the world's goods and see his brothers in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. Now, isn't this sacrificial love? Isn't this a great verse that shows us that we're willing to put ourselves second if we truly have brotherly love? What does he say? I mean, if we see anybody if we have all these goods and we have all these things, but yet we have a brother and we see that they're in need, we see that they have something that they need, but yet we close our heart, we don't reach out and help them, then how can God's love be in us? It's not about what we say, but it's about what we do. We're supposed to love in word and in talk and in deed, right? And so it's a very challenging verse here to remember that, sacrificial love is laying down what you want, laying down what you need, putting yourself second. If you see somebody who's in need, answering that call to reach out to help, support, and be there for them. Okay? Let's look at another passage. Let's turn over to Ephesians chapter 5. And we're going to look at verses 1 and 2 of Ephesians chapter 5, again on this idea of sacrificial love. If we want to have brotherly love, we're going to put ourselves second. We may have to sacrifice to help other people. Ephesians 5, 1 and 2. Therefore, based on everything that he had just said in chapter 4, I want you to be imitators of God, beloved children. Walk in love as Christ loved us, gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. All right. Whose example are we supposed to follow? It says right here, be imitators of God. Walk in love. Remember what Christ did. He loved us. He gave himself up for us. He sacrificed himself. So we too, if we love, we're going to do that. Okay? And so these are just 3 verses I picked out to kind of hit on this sacrificial idea of what brotherly love is all about, being willing to put ourselves second. I also think you see this in the church. I thought about Acts chapter 2, verses 44 through 45. Now, who remembers what happens in Acts chapter 2? What did they do for those that were in need? Sold their lands. They made sure that everybody had what they needed. They made sure that everybody was taken care of, and so they sold their lands to be able to do this and help those people out. I also thought about the Macedonians in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 and 5. It talks about how they gave, and they didn't have a lot to give, but they were reaching in and gave more than they could have, and they sacrificed. So we even see like a biblical example of this in the Bible in 2 Corinthians 8, verses 1 through 5, and then Acts chapter 2, verses 44 through 45 after the day of Pentecost with the early church. And so that's the kind of the idea we get behind this brotherly love, being willing to put ourselves second, being willing to sacrifice our own needs to meet the needs of others. And when we do that, again, it's like the badge. We're wearing this badge and people can see Christ living in us and they can see that we are his children. All right, any comments? Okay. Let's move on to another aspect. I think brotherly love not only is a sacrificial love, but it's also a benevolent love. Now, what do I mean by benevolent? Webster's Dictionary defines benevolent as means of disposition to do good, made known by acts of kindness. I think this is very important that we remember that this brotherly love is followed with acts of kindness and benevolence toward other people. Galatians chapter 6, verse 10 says that whenever we have an opportunity, we are to do good. We are to take up those opportunities, especially those that belong in the faith. You can turn with me there. I'll read it real quick. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, especially those who are of the household of faith. You know, opportunities are going to be presented to us, and I hope we'll take those opportunities to do good and to show kindness to other people. Again, brotherly love is not just a word thing, but it's an action thing. We show kindness to other people. You can go back to what we read about earlier in 1 John chapter 3, verses 17 through 18. Where we talk about how if we have all the world's goods, but we see somebody in need and we don't help them, then how can the love of God be in us? I also thought about James chapter 2. We're going to look at verse 14. James chapter 2. And again, this is the section of Scripture that's about the whole faith, faith having works. And here, if we neglect to help people and neglect to take care of people, it's kind of like our faith is in vain. But James chapter 2, verses 14 and 17, he says, "What good is it, my brothers, if anyone says that he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, be warmed and filled,' without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead." What's the idea you think James is trying to get here about faith and works? They go hand in hand. I mean, you got somebody that comes to you and maybe they're naked or they're hungry, and you just say to them, "Well, be warm and be filled." What good is that, right? It does nothing for that person. You have not accomplished anything. And so he just James kind of goes into, hey, it's hand in hand. It's following up with acts of kindness and action. Yes, sir. Yeah, Michael said you go look at the end of Galatians 5, and Paul ties it together, saying that we should have a faith working in love. verse 6. And so, I thought about that passage in James, where, James is kind of saying faith and works go hand in hand. So if we're going to be people of faith and we're going to have this brotherly love, there should be action so that people can see that we love others. I think another thing to think about is not only is brotherly love benevolent, but not only is brotherly love sacrificial, but it's also something that should be visible. You guys get what I'm saying? People should be able to see it. Now, what does that require of us? If brotherly love is something that should be visible, what has to happen? Okay? But where does that action have to happen? Outside of here. And that's kind of where I want to go from here, is that we've studied about how Jesus says, people are going to know that you're my disciples if you love one another. We see that we're supposed to sacrifice, and we see that we're supposed to be benevolent and help people. The problem is it can't stay here. Okay? And so we need to make sure that we demonstrate this love out of our assembly. I think it should start first here, don't you guys? But after it starts here, it should move out to our community. And we should show our brotherly love to our community so that it can make an impact. And so that's just something else I thought, that this brotherly love is not only sacrificial, benevolent, but it's also visible. And then the last thing that I have for tonight, turn with me to Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10. And look with me in verse 24, and we'll go through 26 tonight. It says here, and let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, all the more as we see the day drawing near. For if we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there is no longer remains a sacrifice for sin. I want us to focus here on a couple of things in Hebrews chapter 10, 24. Brotherly love doesn't just meet physical needs, does it? What else should it meet? Spiritual needs. And sometimes I think we talk about brotherly love and we focus on, we need to do, and sacrifice for people and do these acts of kindness for people. And that's true. Okay? That is part of brotherly love, but also part of brotherly love is to meet the spiritual needs of our fellow brothers and sisters. Now, in this passage, what are some of the things that we can do to help each other and to show that brotherly love? All right, let's look back at verse 24. Let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works. What does he mean right there? Okay? Do any of you ever during the year lack motivation? Do any of you ever during the year need somebody to pick you up and motivate you to keep going at something? Can we not say that that's true about our spiritual walk? Sometimes in our spiritual walk, we become I'm not going to say that we're giving up. I'm just going to say we need to be pushed and we need help being motivated to keep going, right? Again, we're not supposed to do this alone. And so I think it's interesting here that he says one of the things that we can do for each other spiritually is to push each other, to stir up one another, right? To help each other, to encourage each other, to give each other motivation to continue to love, to continue to do these good acts, right? These acts of kindness, these good works. Sometimes we can get in that rut and we forget what we're supposed to be doing. Sometimes we don't realize where we are spiritually, that we're spiritually in a rut. And so it's good to have brothers and sisters to come up to us and say, hey, get involved with me on this. Okay, let's go visit these people. Let's go take food to this person. Hey, let's send cards to these people, right? Or hey, let's go help this family. And so it's important that we not only meet physical needs, but we also meet the spiritual needs. And that's another way we can show brotherly love, by encouraging and pushing people. All right, let's keep looking. Not neglecting to meet together is the habit of some, but encouraging one another all the more as you see the day drawing near. Again, it's this idea of when we're together, we sharpen each other, we make each other stronger, right? I know this time right now, it's making things a lot harder. I'm sure that we'll all agree that spiritually it's been harder this year because we've not been able to be around each other as much as we want to. The church is all about this. And with this situation, we're having to do this. And so it doesn't mix well, okay? It's tough. But one of the things we have to remember, even during a pandemic, is when we do get together, that we sharpen each other, we encourage each other, and we keep pushing each other in our faith, to keep pushing each other, encourage each other to keep going. And that way we're not discouraged, and we don't stop showing this brotherly love. So, I hope tonight's lesson was beneficial for you. Again, just a quick review. We looked at John 13, 34 through 35. We asked the question of why this is a new commandment. It's new because it came directly from Christ. It requires us to have a deeper love. He holds us to a higher standard to love like he loves us. And it's the first time a group of people can be identified by their love for one another. And so that's why it's a new commandment. What does this brotherly love look like? What should we aim for? Well, it's a sacrificial love. It's willing to put other people's needs first and put our needs second. It's a benevolent love, finding opportunities to do good, doing it, finding opportunities to help others who are in need, finding opportunities to put faith and action together. It is visible, so it just shouldn't be here, but it should be in our everyday lives outside of this building so our community can be impacted by it. And it should not just focus, brotherly love, should not just focus on physical needs, but also spiritual needs. Figuring out how to motivate each other, encourage each other, so that we can continue to love and do these deeds together, these good works together. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And you would hope that after everything took place, that a light bulb would click and they would realize, wow, this is the type of love he was talking about for sure. Great comment. Any other comments about brotherly love? All right, we're going to take just a minute break. We'll let our song leader get up here, and we'll do a quick invitation. So good to see everyone tonight. Brother Michael's going to have a singing tonight. It's going to be 9:12. We're going to offer an invitation. I hope maybe something you've heard today in our sermon or something you've heard tonight in our devotional thought that's got you thinking. If you've got anything on your heart, if you've got anything that you need to ask prayers for, we're here for you. We always want to open it up and have this time that you can come forward, you can pray to God, and get our support and encouragement. Again, that's what the family of God is all about. Being there for each other, helping each other, motivating each other, encouraging each other. If you need encouragement tonight, need prayers, we've got this time of invitation so you can come forward and have that thing that we have an invitation from. Days are filled with sorrow and care, hearts are lonely and dreary.